Awesome. Well, welcome to my session. I'm going to talk about empowering mobility, how Uber Transit supports accessible and sustainable cities. All right, so let's. Perfect. Okay, hola a todos. My name is Gaston Kelly. I was born in Quilmes, Argentina. Boston's been my home for well over 25 years now. I joined Uber in 2013, and I was there from 2013 to about 2017. So if you've seen the TV show or read the book, but mostly the TV show, I joined the company around episode 2 and stayed throughout the duration of the series. Around the end of 2017, I went over to a couple of different startups in the mobility space still, one in micromobility, and then into P2P car sharing across operations and policy. 2021, after COVID, I decided to get my master's in London. I was at the London School of Economics, and I spent the majority of my study really focusing on disaster recovery, but also transportation and sustainability, ideally trying to shift modalities so that folks would be more open to switching from single occupancy vehicles into more active modes of transportation like walking, bicycling, and others. 2022, I came back to Uber. What I told my manager at the time, the one who hired me, I said I wouldn't have come back to Uber to work on any other team than on the Uber Transit team. And I lead operations and customer success. So basically what I do day to day, I work with a lot of transit agencies trying to get them to use Uber in the most effective way to kind of help them from a cost perspective and customer service perspective. You can see there the little map. That's where I was born. That's Quilmes. It's in Buenos Aires province, right in the Rio de la Plata. Of course, big soccer fan, as you can imagine. Cool. Okay, so let's begin. First of all, I'm going to do a little bit of setting the scene for transit and transportation. It'll be a little bit of doom and gloom, but then I'm going to kind of tell the story of how we at Uber Transit and just generally we're trying to help improve the future of transit agencies in the US for now, but also globally. Transit agencies today face several key challenges that affect their ability to provide efficient, accessible, and sustainable transportation services. Number one is funding and budget shortfalls. If you're following the news or keeping an eye on it, because of a variety of factors that I'll touch on, it's really, really difficult for transit agencies to have the funding they need to provide reliable, consistent, safe, clean service for the folks who need it the most. Decreasing ridership. I'll talk about it in a moment, but because of the pandemic and the shifting nature of work with folks working more from home, not going into the office as much, or even leaving some of the large urban areas, folks are not riding public transportation as much, which leads to funding issues for sure, but also there's a lack of political will as you get into some of the public policy space. Operational challenges. Everything's gotten more expensive, running buses, running trains, finding folks to drive them. So it makes it even harder to provide that service that is needed. Sustainability, environmental goals. I'll talk about that as we get a little bit to the tail of the presentation. But imagine trying to run a bus system reliably that runs frequently, where you're having fewer riders, fewer funding, operational challenges, and you also have to transition the rolling stock, the buses, from internal combustion to different modes like electric vehicles or hydrogen buses. Really, really hard challenges, especially with supply chain issues as well. And finally, technological integration and modernization. A lot of the transit agencies are coming up with their own applications, trying to make it easier to track the buses, make it easier for customers and riders alike. That's a very, very, very difficult set of problems. So you put all of this together, what I've learned doing the job that I'm doing right now is one of the hardest jobs you could do is working at a transit agency right now. Just to get a little bit into the data. So this is a chart. If you look at it at 100%, that would be where transit ridership was in 2019, before the pandemic. And since then, ridership has recovered, but it hasn't recovered quickly enough or as much as folks would have expected. This is a little bit outdated. It's about a year ago. But I can tell you that if you extend this into 2024, we're still only looking at about 80%. And so folks are starting to ask really hard questions, which is ridership ever going to go back to what it was pre-pandemic? And if not, then what does the future hold for transit systems? With lower ridership, most agencies are now facing a fiscal cliff due to expiration of federal relief funds. So a lot of the agencies through the pandemic received a lot of additional help from the federal government to maintain operations and keep folks employed and the buses and trains running. The ridership we talked about, and then the rising operational cost. This is everything from fuel to labor to everything else. Fiscal cliff, scary term, but basically what it means is there's going to be a pretty severe lack of funding. And it looks like all agencies, more than half, are going to experience it. 71% of the largest ones. And the largest ones being, your New York, Boston, LA, Dallas, Miami, and some of those major cities, Chicago as well. Okay, so what happens when you go into a fiscal cliff when you're running a public transit system in a city? There's a number of things that agencies could do, but all of them would pretty much make transit less accessible. Not all of them, but some are a little bit hopeful. If you look at the ones about seeking new funding is just an incredibly difficult, time-consuming, uncertain thing to go through. You have to go through legislatures and different kinds of really bureaucratic and slow avenues to increase taxes, get more allocation of funding. So it's going to come down to reducing the cost structure, reducing transit agency costs. That's always a scary term because reduce cost a lot of the time is through reducing service or not doing the replacement of buses and trains or running them less frequently. Seeking increased fares, that's something that is incredibly difficult to do and usually hurts the folks who need transit the most and can afford it the least. And finally, least likely to pursue reduced workforce. So reduced service, I'm going to focus on that one and share maybe one of my favorite quotes from one of our partner agencies. We would sell the furniture before we cut service. So these are the folks we at Uber Transit work with the most. These are transit agency folks, planners, and otherwise, who are so devoted and mission driven that the last thing they want to do is make the transit service less accessible, reliable, anything like that. They would sell the furniture first. So that's kind of who we're talking about. Thinking about the Latina community. So it would be the community that would be maybe the most negatively impacted by a less accessible public transit system. From urban residents, 27% of Latiné use public transit daily or weekly. It's a whole lot. Elderly folks, 5 times more likely to use public transit than other non-Latina counterparts. And 44% of Latina households with elderly members also live at or below the poverty line. So it's a lot of scene setting, but I think the story here is it's very hard to be a transit agency generally, especially right now because of the ridership and a lot of the issues because of the pandemic. The lack of funding, we're going to get into a fiscal cliff situation, which will lead to reduced funding. When that happens, really hard decisions will have to be made. And when those are made, the Latina community will probably feel more of that negative pain. Okay. So then what does Uber Transit do? Why am I here? And how do we support accessible and sustainable cities? Our team is about 25 people. It's quite a small team when you consider Uber is about 27,000 now. But it's a team made up of mostly folks who come from the transit agency or are very passionate about transit. And our mission is to complement public transit. So the way we've shifted this team and the way we're focusing our everyday is to try to do everything in our power to leverage the power of the Uber platform to support public transit agencies. You're not going to see us in the front lines talking about a lot of these partnerships. You'll hear me doing it now because I'm just really passionate about this. Or we're not going to be in the front of the newspaper or any stories, anything like that. What we want to do is be powering the transit agency experience so that they can reduce costs and not have to cut service and increase the customer experience. How do we do it? Okay, so we bring the mission to life by supporting transit agencies across a variety of use cases. First, last mile. Many of us have heard probably about the first last mile problem, essentially defined as how does somebody get to that transit hub, bus station, subway station, metro station, etc. Really, really interesting problem. A lot of academics are really thinking hard about this. A first last mile is not just a mile. For some folks who have mobility issues, it can be significantly less. In some of the parts of the country where it's very warm or there's a lot of precipitation, even less. So it's quite variable. Paratransit, these are folks who are experiencing a disability. Shared microtransit, so trying to get folks in smaller vehicles than a bus. We can create some of these systems pretty easily and pretty affordably. Supporting fixed route, community programs, and these are programs to help folks who need access to transportation the most at times they need it the most. And finally, service disruptions. So think about it when a bus breaks down, train breaks down. You don't have a ton of time, so I'm going to cover these four, and I'm going to cover two of them in one use case, and I think that will get us to the top of the hour. Just a wall of logos to show everybody here. We are partnering with a lot of transit agencies. I think it's over 80, and a lot of the major ones, they are including us in part of their service delivery, which I think we're very humbled by. We're learning a lot. It's a very challenging environment, but there is a need for the service we provide for the agencies to continue providing their service for the riders. You may see a transit agency here. Perfect. Okay. Okay, so first and foremost, I want to talk about Dallas. So Dallas is one of the most exciting programs out there, incredibly innovative, and it's a first last mile program and also shared microtransit. It's called the GoLink program. The way the program works here, and you can see on the right a picture of all the zones, they have 32 different zones, and what they allow you to do is when you purchase a transit ticket, you can either request a ride within each of the zones or from each of the zones into a transit stop to or from. So what they're essentially doing it is with one purchase of one ticket, you're buying your entire journey and not so much just a leg of it. What it's done is made transportation on demand. It has a scalable solution, and it's affordable and accessible. The result here is DART was named the Transit Agency of the Year by Latinos in Transit. It's an organization I am a part of, in part because the program helped to increase job access through transit by 33% in Latina communities. So really, really powerful results from this program. In what part does Uber Transit play? So before, if you had to take a trip in Dallas, you could either take a taxi or the light rail or the bus or an Uber, and they all had their own separate kind of payment methods and ways to get those trips. Through the app that they have created called GoPass, you pretty much put in where your journey begins, where your journey ends, and the app will automatically tell you the cost, the time, and the modality. So you can see here, here's what the app actually looks like. The GoLink program, we just talked about a moment ago, that's the one where Uber plays a big part. We do about 60% of those trips, and that's about $3. Take about 10 minutes. But you also have other options. If you are maybe a little bit more cost constrained, you want to pay $2, you can walk 2 minutes to the green line, walk 2 minutes, and then get a car. Or you can just bike the entire way. It gives folks a lot of choice and a lot of different modalities just from a journey perspective. Awesome. Okay, so now I want to talk about paratransit. I think this is the one when somebody asks me, do I love what I do? I'd say yes, although we have a lot of issues all the time and the stress is a bit high, but I get out of bed for all the different programs that we support on the paratransit side. I'll talk a little bit about some of the legislative foundation here. So paratransit comes from the American with Disabilities Act, the ADA, 1990, civil rights law prohibiting discrimination based on disability. It covers a wide array of areas, including transportation. But the purpose is to ensure equal opportunities and access for individuals with disabilities. Paratransit is required under the ADA. Agencies must provide this service for folks who cannot use regular fixed route due to their disability. It is required to be comparable to fixed route, so the bus, in terms of area served, hours of operation, and fare. And finally, it is extremely, extremely difficult and expensive to do well. Agencies will spend 1/8 of their budget on providing paratransit and serve 1/40th of the riders. So really, really difficult. Through a partnership with Pace Suburban Bus in Chicago, what Pace is doing is they figured out, well, instead of having folks call in and request a reservation for a trip on a paratransit ride, why don't we just give them up to 8 trips per day on Uber, covered up to $30, and just see what happens. And I think what's happened has been really, really fantastic. And I'll share a video in a moment. On the right-hand side, you can see the coverage area, similar to the fixed route, similar hours. And these trips have really increased accessibility and equity while also reducing cost for the agency. So if we zoom out, the agency, it costs them about $70 to provide a paratransit trip. Through Uber, that trip only costs them about $25, $30, which is really, really fantastic. The riders can actually request the trips whenever it suits their schedule. So it gives them a lot of freedom, which they didn't have before. And the level of service is a little bit better. I have a quote here, which we heard from one of our customers' agencies. The benefits of on-demand transportation, especially for the paratransit customers, cannot be overstated. As our customers tell us, it's life-changing. I want to share a video here.
Every moment with my family is a gift. Independence gives you wings to fly.
Confirm UberX. Confirm the pickup spot.
Uber's transit partnerships is helping me get to work faster, easier, on my own. Every hour, every moment matters.
Cool. It's really, really powerful stuff. And just for the Chicago partnership, I think we have on average 2,000 people a week taking advantage of these rides. And these are folks who are ambulatory, meaning they don't need access to a wheelchair accessible vehicle, but they may be low vision or have we currently experience different types of disabilities. We have somewhere between 20 and 25 programs just like this all over the country, and thousands of people in this community are now getting access to move more on demand. Historically, the paratransit experience, they would have to reserve their trip 24 hours in advance. And now they can do it, just like anybody else, the same day on demand, and be able to run a little bit late or want to stay a little bit late with friends and family, which we feel really, really proud to be a part of on the Uber Transit team. Okay, finally, I want to talk about fixed route complement. So this is how we support bus systems. I'll talk about Miami. Miami to me is a very, very special city. It's a city that I helped launch Uber in back in 2014. And it's a city that recently went through one of the largest network overhauls in history with their Better Bus network. You can see some of the results here. Essentially what a bus network redesign will try to achieve is try to make a more efficient use of the resources to make sure the bus lines run where people need the most, so that there are folks getting access to more frequent bus routes, more people are able to move around. The results have been pretty stunning. So the number of residents who live near frequent transit increased by 30%. Average resident will have access to 28% more jobs and useful destinations within a 45-minute trip. But I think the interesting piece here, and where we Uber fill a pretty interesting gap, is there are some folks who didn't benefit very clearly from the bus redesign. So if you think about it, anytime you remove a bus line from anywhere, there are folks who rely on that bus line. And even if it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 folks every single day, when you remove that bus route, they have no options. And even if you take that bus and move it on a different route, and you're actually moving more people, and it's a more effective and more efficient use of resources, you're still leaving folks who relied on the system without options. So what Miami did, the county did, is they replaced some of those low-performing bus routes or underperforming or underutilized bus routes with an Uber voucher system. And you can see a map on the right. These are the starting locations of trips in Miami-Dade on Uber through this voucher for the Better Bus Network. And I think the interesting piece is you can kind of backtrack and figure out which bus routes were removed or replaced, but folks still are able to get where they need to go. And right now, I think we're seeing 2,000 unique residents of Miami still be able to get where they're going through Uber, even though their bus route has been shifted, which is pretty neat. Okay, we have 5 minutes to go, so we can conclude. Uber is doing 1 million trips an hour. I think it's not lost on me that Uber has an interesting relationship with transit generally in the history. So I'm very proud to be able to work on a team that supports transit agencies. But we have a lot of responsibility here as we talk about mobility in the future. We are committed to going zero emission by 2040. There's a variety of ways we're doing this through EVs, putting trains in the Uber app. We're doing this in Europe. Uber Shuttle, which is essentially the ability to reserve a seat on a large capacity vehicle. We just announced one yesterday in LaGuardia, New York, from downtown Manhattan to LaGuardia. And the idea here is instead of booking your own trip to go to the airport, you just book a shuttle, same experience with the Uber app. And UberX Share, which are shareable trips, pretty much reducing the carbon emissions per trip in half. And then what I talked about over the last maybe 20 minutes or so, complementing public transit across a variety of use cases. Essentially, what we're trying to do is the more trips we can shift to transit, then the better the outcomes for the environment, but certainly for the transit systems as well. Here's a map of a transit system. What we believe is if a system is doing more than 20 passengers per hour, the right solution is rail and bus, and we're willing to support it any way we can. 10 to 20 dedicated paratransit or dedicated microtransit. So those are smaller vans you can request via an app. But if it's less than 10, this is where bringing in Uber can be an interesting solution to help support the rest of the system and make sure those federal dollars go further. Cool. So what does this matter? Well, as we're getting into interesting times from a climate perspective, annual emission scenarios relative to 2015 are starting to be even scarier than ever. If we continue business as usual, that's the red line. Multimodal cities alone, orange. If we only go down the electrification, we're down in the pink. But if we can do electrification and multimodal, so electrification going down the EV route, which we're going to go by 2040, but also removing some of these car trips and making them transit, which is helped by powering the transit systems to be more reliable and more efficient, then I think we're going to be, it's going to give us a chance to keep warming below 2 degrees Celsius. Awesome. Well, that's all I have for today. I don't know if there's any questions, but there's my email if anybody is interested, and my LinkedIn information as well. Are there projects I'm excited about right now? There's a lot of really interesting work that we're involved with right now. I think there's a lot of work in the Middle East around creating, well, not really creating, but actually starting massive transit systems from the beginning, just from scratch. And the idea there is, well, if you're going to open a brand new train station, is there anything we can do with Uber to create the same kind of experience we're seeing in Dallas? So that's what I'm excited about. There's one in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, which is interesting. We are also the main public transit system in a small city in Canada called Innisfil. They figured out that if they don't use any buses at all, it's actually better for them financially to use Uber. We're meeting with them, I think, in person in a month, so I'm excited to see how that's going as well. Is there somewhere we can learn more about this work? Yeah, so we have a website on the Uber Transit, well, on the Uber website for Uber Transit. There's a variety of different use cases there. I only picked a few that I found interesting and relevant for the summit, but there's several others as well. Cool. All right, well, hopefully it was interesting. Really appreciated the ability to share some of this experience and putting it together. Hopefully everybody has a wonderful rest of the summit. And yeah. Does Uber use technology in real-time learning to enhance the security of its transit services? So I guess I'll answer that quickly. Our transit services are largely the same as the consumer Uber. So what we do is we have a layer that is more for working with governments that can allow them to access Uber rides in bulk. So it's a lot of the same thing that you would experience on the consumer experience. Awesome. All right, folks. Well, thank you very much, and hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your day.